Hi there, welcome back. You're watching India Tonight with me, Sumita Karir. And our top story tonight, well, South China Sea has been witnessing serious escalations between China and the Philippines. The Philippines has released a video showing what it calls intentional high-speed ramming. According to the Philippine military, Chinese Coast Guard officers wielded bladed weapons, including an axe during an altercation that happened near the second Thomas shoal in the disputed Spratly Islands on Monday. In fact, the incident occurred as Filipino forces were conducting a mission to resupply soldiers stationed aboard a warship, which Manila uses to assert its territorial claims in the region. Now, China in its defense says that the Filipino vessel deliberately and dangerously approached the Chinese ship, forcing it to take measures. Now, both the nations, like I said, have exchanged accusations over the confrontation. The incident, remember, represents a significant escalation in tensions in the South China Sea. But the bigger point to note here is the use of medieval weapons by Chinese forces, which raises questions on their professionalism also. Remember, US has a defense pact with the Philippines, which makes this confrontation even more sinister. So is it a Galwan on the seas? And is China simply creating a reason for war? To discuss that and more, we're now joined by Ashok Sajjanar, former ambassador, and Maruf Raza, former consulting editor with the Times Group. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. Let me first come to you, Mr. Ashok, Mr. Sajjanar. Only pirates do this. Now, this is according to the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and rightly so, perhaps, sir. So let me begin by asking you, what's China done? Is this not really an act of war according to international law? What does the law really state as far as these sort of military incursions are concerned?
You know, number one, Sumitra, thank you very much for having me on your show. Number one, this area is not China's territory. You know what it claims to be. Meaning, why is it coming here? Because it says that Philippines is trying to intrude into its territory. Now, it has claimed the whole of the South China Sea as its own territory on some fake, bogus historical rationale. But, you know, it was taken to the International Court of Justice, to the Permanent Court arbitration at The Hague in 2016. There was a ruling that had come from there. Philippines had taken it there, saying that China does not have any rights over these waters. And the Chinese case was completely thrown out of court, saying that whatever claims China is maintaining, they are rejected, they are not maintainable. So I think Philippines, it would appear, is well within its right to go through these waters and, as you mentioned, resupply its warship and the people who are on that particular warship. And it is China which comes in, it is threatening these countries, and it is not only Philippines. It has happened with the Philippines right now, but earlier with the Vietnamese, with Malaysia, with Brunei, all of them. And recently, the Chinese, they have got a law, you know, the Coast Guard, that they can, if there are others who are, what they say, intruding into this area, then they can go and militarily try to disarm them and try to take possession. So what China is doing is wrong. Earlier, what used to happen is that when they used to do some muscle flexing, the opponent parties would just not stand up against them. And China, through its gray zone warfare and through its information warfare, would be able to take charge. But right now, Philippines is standing up. And as you said, the last comment here, you know, it's Galwan, because none of the others stood up. India was the first country which stood up against China in 2017 in Doklam, and then again in Eastern Ladakh and Galwan in 2020. Sumitra.
Absolutely, sir. And a very fair point made here. I want to take this across to Maruf. Maruf, where does this go now? I mean, as Mr. Ashok is pointing out, there is a view that's resonating with many people that Philippines perhaps needs to retaliate. How, in your view, should Philippines now react, given that the West is now assisting it?
You see, there are multiple views on what can be done. The first thing to understand is, Ambassador Sajjanar made a very pertinent point. This is not Chinese territory. You cannot go anywhere in the world with a colored felt pen and mark out the parts of the sea and say, this is mine. exactly what the Chinese have done by drawing the so-called 9-dash line around the archipelago of islands that make up the South China Sea. Now, all other countries in South China Sea that have a dispute, and virtually everyone has a dispute with the Chinese, argue that the Chinese cannot lay claim to this territory by just brandishing a map around. Is the same argument that China gives to India, that we'll not accept the lines you draw on the Sino-Indian border because you've drawn them. Though we have a historical context to it, China's argument is based on the South China Sea, which is of 273 BC. That's nearly 3 centuries ago. Now, the second thing is that the Chinese are after the South China Sea because it's a mineral-rich area. The Chinese have taken over little island positions, built embankments and extended areas around there, and made a lot of island territories of their own that gives them a lot of bases. Now, that is a region from where a lot of maritime shipping goes through from the Indian subcontinent, Indian Ocean, right to the Pacific Ocean and up to Japan. And China wants to be in control because China is obsessed of being in control with everything. Because today it has the largest navy in numbers, though not as strong as the US, because the US decides to flex its naval muscle, China will be left licking its wounds. But even then, China is adamant that it will keep pushing its luck. And this is what people have called its salami slice policy in the Himalayas. They keep coming, they encroach upon pieces of land and water and island territories, and they suddenly plant the flag there and claim it's their own. Now, what can be done? I mean, China has little respect for international law. So this matter has been taken to the International Court of Justice, which has ruled against China, but China doesn't give a damn. And China also knows it has the military force and the economic might to be able to push its line through. And finally, and most importantly, the one language that China understands is a combination of force deployments, which only the US can bring to bear in that part of the world, as it has done in the past when China got a little pushy.
And that, Maru, brings
Hong
me
Kong.
to my next question. Right, and that brings me to my next question, and let me take that across to Mr. Sajjanar. Mr. Sajjanar, do these actions and incursions really indicate that China is looking to test the US, and how far is it looking to extend its security commitments to its allies, which is also perhaps reflected in the statement that the US has released with respect to its ironclad commitments to the Philippines?
Yeah, you're right, Sumita. You know what China feels is that the United States is already very actively engaged both in the Russia-Ukraine conflict as also with the Israel-Hamas conflict. So, you know, it's both its mind space and the possibility for the United States to get engaged in this particular area might not be so very large. And particularly, this is a time when the elections are going on. So I think it has been pushing bit by bit. It is not that, you know, it comes and takes over. First, it sort of, puts this 9-dash line. And we have seen that after Xi Jinping has come to power in 2012-13, you know, they've become much more aggressive, much more belligerent in this. So it is, I would not say it is trying to test the waters and trying to test the resolve of the United States. But what it has seen so far is that all these countries in the South China Sea with whom it has these conflicts, maritime area conflicts, you know, they have succumbed to the pressure of China. And China sort of, you know, dangles a carrot one way, say that, you know, we are going to have draw up a code of conduct with the US to how, you know, we would be working in the South China Sea. But then it has gone and it has occupied all the islands there, which according to international law, which is the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea 1982, according to that, these islands belong to Philippines, they belong to Vietnam, they belong to Malaysia, whether it is the Paracel Islands, it is the Spratly Islands, it is the Scarborough Shoal, it has gone, it has occupied them. And many artificial islands also it has created there, and it has militarized them. So, I think its presence there has become quite formidable. And none of the countries really wants directly to challenge the Chinese force. But I think time has come. And if you permit, Sumita, I'll just make one point. One, these countries are not willing to do it is because they find that China is their biggest trading partner, number one. And number two, it is their biggest investor through the Belt and Road Initiative and some of the others. So they say, okay, a little bit of pushing by China is acceptable if, we are getting good returns from that on trade and investment, etc. So I think if we are trying to find, it is not only the military component that we have to look at, but it is also the economic component that the countries have to come together and look at and push back against China.
Right. So you've made a very, very valid point, a very interesting point, and which is where the China plus one policy that India espouses really comes into the picture, creating newer alliances, creating new opportunities for investment. Maruf, I want to ask you, what really explains Xi's love for brutal medieval weapon? This sort of a thing has also happened in Galwan. So what explains this strategy by China?
See, President Xi Jinping has to now, having got virtually a lifelong tenure, has to now dig his heels in and show that China means business. And China has got a number of things on its agenda, just like the US has. And China is going to take on the easier targets to deal with first. And as it begins to be successful there, like South China Sea, or even in Ladakh, where I don't see it having success, but it hopes to, it will then create a Chinese narrative in favor of China getting all that it claims, and that is Taiwan. So that's what he is pushing for. But equally important is that the US elections or no elections. You see, foreign policies remain consistent, as we've seen with the re-election of Mr. Modi. So the US has to put its foot down as a responsible leader of the Western liberal democratic setup. And if it can't do that, then as one Time magazine wrote years ago about Bill Clinton, nations in the world expect America to lead. You can't provide leadership, Mr. Clinton, go back to Arkansas. Same applies to Mr. Biden. You can't lead, then don't fight the next elections.
Right. Right, Maruf, and one final question before we let the two of you go from Mr. Sajanar. Mr. Sajanar, aren't countries like the Philippines really being let down by ASEAN when it comes to dealing with security issues?
Well, all these countries are really looking out for themselves. All of them are much smaller as compared to China. And they know that they cannot really withstand, against the might of China. We saw what happened in 1979 when China attacked Vietnam. Vietnam could sort of, push back against China, and China had to retreat. But I think all these other countries, none of them wants war. None of them wants conflict. They don't want to choose sides between China and the United States. They are very happy trading with China because they are really looking at, the dollars and pence that is coming in to them. And they are getting investment without any questions asked. That's what I said, that, if the West, if the United States, if we really want to challenge China in that particular area, provide investment for infrastructure, provide education, provide trade. So, in that sense, there have been some initiatives that have been taken. Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. We also saw the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that Mr. Trump got out of it. So now it has evolved into CPTPP. But I think those are also the areas where we need to go, and not only military confrontation. That is an important. You have to show that you are prepared. But I think also go forward in these areas.
Absolutely. All right. On that note, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us and sharing your thoughts with our viewers on China and its expansionist tactics, which have been discussed at several forums. We've also seen